influence is very, very difficult indeed. And our experience is, after the last coalition, the major party gets the credit for everything that's done, and the junior party takes the blame for the things that people don't like. And therefore, it'll be down to him. He'll have to make his own decision. But I should be astonished if he would countenance any kind of coalition, either with the Labour or the Conservatives. What he can say is we will deal with every issue on a vote-by-vote basis. We will not have, if you like, opposition for opposition's sake, but we will consider everything on its merits. That, I think, is something he can sell to his own party, and it's something which will preserve his and indeed the party's integrity.
Lord Campbell, thank you. David.
Well, there are fascinating scenes up in Sunderland where, being further north than London, there's still a bit of daylight as the students, look at them with these boxes, bringing the ballot boxes to the central count and white-gloved, handling them carefully, all trained to do this. Both Sunderland and Newcastle have been competing, and indeed the man who organised Sunderland last time round has been giving advice to Slough as well in Buckinghamshire because they wanted to get in their result as fast as possible. So the boxes have to be opened. There is a slight problem here this time round, which is that if people go who have postal ballots and put them in these boxes, they then have to be individually verified, and that takes a bit of time. But they're saying now, I think Newcastle says they'll have theirs by 11 o'clock. Sunderland, I hope, a bit before. Let's talk to our reporter down there. Hello, can you hear us in Newcastle? Babita Sharma in Newcastle.
David,
please.
hello, yes.
Hello. It's looking a great race, this. How are you doing? Yeah.
Everyone was gasping when you said you think Sunderland might be a few minutes before Newcastle, because that's definitely what they want to hear here tonight, because they are definitely clock watching here. Frantic activity behind me, because the first ballot box came in about 7 minutes past 10. 128 in total are going to be making their way through to the sports arena. We think we've probably got about 50 of those boxes in so far. And what Newcastle are hoping to do is get a declaration result announced here by as early as roughly, maybe, 11:15. Now, if they do that, they will become the first to declare a result on general election night. And crucially, of course, they want to beat Sunderland. They've got a very healthy rivalry that's been going on for many elections in the past. And they keep reminding us here tonight that they, of course, beat Sunderland last year in the EU referendum result. I was here that night, and tonight is no exception when it comes down to the precise process of the boxes coming into the hall here and the counting getting underway. So if they are on track, and they're looking pretty optimistic, maybe before 11 o'clock and before Sunderland.
Babita, thank you very much indeed. And of course, this is, I mean, it's great to have the race, but it's important too because those first results will give us a clue through our psephologists, really. I wouldn't understand it, but will give us a clue of whether the exit poll is accurate or not, and we'll be hearing from them. But I'm joined now by Stuart Hosey, who was the MP for Dundee East, indeed is standing for Dundee East. Mr Hosey, you're in Glasgow tonight, I think, but thank you for joining us. What do you make of this exit poll, which looks, if it's right, rather damaging for the SNP? Down 22 is what the exit poll is saying.
Well, first of all, it is only an exit poll, and so all of the usual caveats and pinches of salt should apply. The main story from it, if it's accurate, is that Theresa May has given up a majority. And we now have, again, if the numbers are correct, 314 Tories versus 314 others and 22 from the Northern Irish parties. That's an extraordinary thing. For Theresa May to call this election for narrow party advantage, and then, if these numbers are correct, to blow it incredibly.
If she has blown it in the sense that she doesn't have an overall majority, would you allow her to go through with the Queen's speech in the House of Commons as the SNP, assuming you have at least a substantial wedge in the new House?
Well, again, if this poll is correct, it would still point to the SNP winning the election in Scotland, which is what we set out to achieve. I don't recall us ever voting for significant Tory policy in the past, and it would be hard to see in the current climate, with an austerity, cuts, hard Brexit party, that we'd want to support them in any way in this future Parliament.
We've heard, well, let me put it like this. The reason that I said at the beginning, we were a bit cautious about SNP on 34 down 22, is we're told that a lot of these are very tight. The polling is suggesting 50-50, so you don't quite know which way to call them. But two people in particular, Angus Robertson, your leader in Westminster, and Alex Salmond, the former leader of the SNP, are both said to be under threat if this exit poll is correct. Have you got any information from them about how they think they've done?
No, I don't have any specific information from those seats at all. But I mean, common sense would tell us that a big beast like Alex Salmond, a fantastic parliamentary performer like Angus Robertson, with their track records in the constituencies, would have an edge over any insurgent Tory campaign. But as I say, it will take some hours before this all comes out in the wash.
Mr. Hosier, thank you very much. When it does come out in the wash, perhaps you'll be very kind and come back and, in the light of reality rather than speculation, tell us what your position is.
Indeed, I'll be delighted to, as long as it's stopped raining by then.
Thank you very much indeed. A last word from you two about this then. You heard Ming Campbell talking about what would happen, and everybody is dumping on the Tories at the moment for having called this election in the first place. I mean, dumping on you in the sense of saying it was a misjudgment.
No, I think it was the right thing to do, to have a clear and strong mandate as we go into the Brexit negotiations. Theresa May didn't have that mandate last year when she took over from David Cameron, and it was clear that other opposition parties were in the business of frustrating a successful Brexit. So I think it was the right thing to do, to ask the British people for a mandate, and we don't yet know. With not a single result in, we don't yet know what the result is.
It was the right thing to do, but if it goes wrong, you'll be sitting there saying it was the wrong thing to do.
We haven't got a result.
No, but I mean, you can't sit there saying it was the right thing to do. You know, if it turns out wrong, you'll be hanging your head in shame, or at least you'll be blaming Theresa May for having called it in the first place.
Well, I think it was right to ask the British people for their support, for a strong mandate to negotiate this very complex Brexit. And I think that was the right thing to do, because she inherited from David Cameron a previous manifesto, which of course was designed before the Brexit referendum.
Your Shadow Defence Secretary, Emily Thornberry, Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry is Foreign Secretary, his Defence Secretary changes a bit.
Was Defence Secretary.
Yes. She's just said that she thinks that Theresa May, on the basis of this exit poll, should resign. Would that be a call?
Well, look, it's an exit.
Don't say again, we don't know the exit poll. Just assume for a moment the exit poll is right.
I'm so cautious on these occasions because of where we've been in the past.
Just assume it's right.
But if it is right, I think her position is becoming increasingly untenable. And I tell you why. And Michael, you need to listen to what the people were saying. Here's Theresa May promised us on 7 different occasions that she wouldn't go for a snap general election, and she went for it. And she went for it on the basis of wanting to secure a mandate that she already had. And people just saw through that. And they saw this as an election which was for party advantage rather than the interest of the country. And it looks as though they've rejected her as a result of that.
Well, she didn't have a mandate. She came into
Please, we voted for Article.
Yes, but she did not.
We just voted
She
for
did not
it.
have a mandate from people. Indeed, many people argued she should call an election much
Look,
earlier.
People saw this as pure opportunism, and it looks as though they've rejected it. And they thought she's putting party advantage above that of the country, when actually what we need to do now is addressing the real issue of the economy, is about our economy, our public services,
You've been
and yes, the
fighting for party
negotiations.
advantage over the last 6 or 7 weeks.
All right, look, Laura, what's your judgment on this?
Well, my phone at the moment is filling up with messages of scepticism, not of outright denial, but of scepticism from both parties. One senior Labour figure has just said to me, this doesn't feel believable from where they sit. Somebody on the Conservative side has said to them that it feels wrong. But, of course, this is an extremely extensive exit poll, and Theresa May, having looked unassailable at the start of this campaign, had a very bumpy time. Whether that was over social care, her manifesto promise that she was forced to tweak and forced to change, or whether it was over the issue of police cuts that became a huge pressure for her in the closing moments of the campaign. And I think also, and we heard this from voters on the doorstep when we were out around the country, some people were perhaps not resentful, but a bit peeved about having another election. And I just wonder, Michael Fallon, until April the 18th, you were also sitting there saying it was not the right thing to have an election. You were saying it would be the wrong thing to have an election. And people around the country saw that. They were sceptical about Theresa May going to the country.
I think they understood the central argument that there were other parties determined to frustrate the Brexit process, to vote against it. We heard the Liberal Democrats were going to have a campaign for a second referendum using their peers in the House of Lords.
But if the Conservatives go backwards, surely it will end up having seen to be an enormous political mistake to have called an election that she didn't need to do.
Well,
even if the result is anywhere near this, it's a catastrophic error, and people have seen through it.
We haven't had a result.
Let's wait, exactly. Let's wait till we've had a result, because the exit poll...
I just said, even if it's near this.
You're getting carried away now.
I'm not at all. I'm very sceptical.
The exit poll may have egg on its face, in which case Sky, ITV and the BBC will all have egg on their faces, because it was a joint poll, I'm glad to say. We're not out here on our own for once.
Getting your excuses in early.
Getting my excuses in early. You were getting your excuses in early too. So let's look at the battleground then, assuming this... well, I'll assume nothing. Jeremy Vine, let's have a look at that.
Listening to your conversation, I think we really shouldn't assume very much at all here. But we have the exit poll, and here's what I'm going to show you. We're looking here at Conservative seats that are the most marginal, the most vulnerable, because they were so tight last time. So starting up here with Gower, won by only 27 votes in 2015 by the Conservatives. Derby North, Amanda Soloway is the MP there. Croydon Central, the Minister Gavin Barwell, and so on. Down we go. Down this first page of 32 seats, the Conservatives' most vulnerable seats. Now, we've fed the exit poll into this, and let's see what we think has happened here. Let's see how much of a land grab Labour have made here. So we have, amazingly, Gower staying Conservative under the poll. Derby North, Croydon Central going to Labour. Bury North, quite a lot of damage. Morley and Outward, Ed Balls' old seat, going back to Labour. We've got quite a lot of damage here in the first two columns. And then, interestingly, you see, as the board goes on, actually the Conservatives start to defend themselves better. Not in Warrington South, not in Keighley, but generally speaking, the Conservatives look at it. So it looks as if that's the extent of the Labour advance. But it isn't. It's a very patchy prediction, this, because actually, you see here, here's the second board, 32 more seats, bigger majorities. Torbay, for example, a 3,000 majority, and they go up as we go down the board. What do we think has happened here? Let's have a look. So I ask it to change, and you can see that some of these Labour gains are not in places you might expect. So Broxtowe, for example, Calder Valley, Pudsey, we have as Labour gains. Exit poll, I have to stress. Colne Valley and so on. So Labour gaining here. Enfield Southgate, you remember the Michael Portillo moment in 1997. We have going back to Labour. So on that board, Labour have done some more damage to the Conservatives, and it doesn't stop there. We go to even better defended Conservative seats now. Now, these are ones that you would not have thought could go to any other party when Theresa May started the election campaign. Let's see what the exit poll says. And here we have Labour reaching into seats where there may be a 5,000 or 6,000 majority. Warwick and Leamington, Elmerton, Rothwell, Milton Keynes South, Reading West. Under the exit poll we have going Labour. We'll have to see what happens when we actually come to the actual results, which surely won't be too long. Let me just change the board. Let's turn it around now and let's look at targets. So when Mrs May called the election, she's thinking, OK, we're going to gain some Conservative seats, some Labour seats and from the other parties. Have they managed to make any gains in this extraordinary result where they seem to have reversed? Well, the seat that's most vulnerable to the Conservatives is Chester, because Labour won it with only a 93-vote margin. And then you go to Ealing Central and Acton, Rupert Hook in London, Berwickshire and Roxburgh's a very tight win for the SNP, and so on. So these are the seats that the Conservatives you would think, advance into first. Again, let's see what we think has happened. And you can see it's very, very poor performance. There's nothing, very little going on. They've taken, according to the exit poll, Berwickshire and Roxburgh, which was very marginal, Scottish seat, and we think as well Wrexham there. Ian Lucas was the MP there, so that seat would have gone Conservative. Seems to be a bit better story in Wales and in Scotland for the Conservatives than in England. Let's go to the second board here. Let's just keep doing these targets. So these are safer seats, but still maybe the Conservatives would have had their eyes on them at the start of the election campaign before things started to go wrong. Let's see if they've won any seats here. Have the Conservatives won any seats? Yes, they have. But what have they got in common? Clwyd, South Wales, Dale in Wales, Allen and Deeside in Scotland, Clacton, obviously special case because it was UKIP, and Dumfries and Galloway, a Scottish seat, Aberdeenshire, West Scotland, and Newport East was Jessica Morden was the MP there. That was Labour. That was Wales. So in England, the gains for the Conservatives seem to be few and far between. One more board for you. Here we go. These are seats which would have been hard for the Conservatives to gain. Anything happening here? Let's see. very, very little. Perth and North Perthshire, Murray in Scotland, nothing in England. Extraordinary. Labour have done some serious damage to Conservative seats in England, and they may have offset it with gains in Wales and in Scotland, but all from the exit poll. We'll have to see. David.
Boy, oh boy, are we going to be hung, drawn and quartered if this is all wrong, which it still might well be, but we have to go on with what we've got from the exit poll, and indeed there's reaction already to this exit poll. I'm joined by two people who'll be sitting here during the evening, Amol Rajan, who's the BBC's media editor, and Kamal Ahmed, who's our economics editor. You start. Has there been an immediate reaction?
Well, I think it's safe to say there has been a huge reaction. This is a massive shock. There's obviously huge caveats, David. Lots of people saying that there are, as you said, lots of close seats, so it's too early to say. But astonishment in across the Twitter sphere. Caroline Lucas, the Green Party leader, has just tweeted saying, "Hardly dare hope this is right. To be clear, the Greens will never support a Tory government. Hashtag hope over hate." Jason Groves, who's the political editor of the Daily Mail, a paper that's been very supportive of Theresa May, says that Brenda from Bristol, a famous quote from Brenda from Bristol, who said that, why do we need to have another election, said is going to have to cope with yet another election if this exit poll is right. And already, although it's very early, we haven't got results, there is some big themes emerging on social media, David. One is that this is a disaster for Theresa May, as Laura has pointed out. Another is that there may well be another election. And a third one that people like Lord Ashcroft are unanimous on is that it's going to be a very long night.
And Brenda from Bristol, I remember, she's not another bloody election.
Not another one. Why does she have to do it? But in a Bristolian accent, I think, that I will never get close to emulating.
OK. Kamal, has there been a reaction?
There has, David. We were here together on referendum night,
yes,
when voted Brexit,
yes,
and there's a similar feel. Of course, as Amol says, as we've all said, you have to be careful. This is a poll, and we haven't actually seen any real results, but the pound is down about 2% already against the dollar. It's also down against the euro. I think that's not as much about Jeremy Corbyn could be the Prime Minister, depending on how things may turn out if this exit poll is correct. But it is about uncertainty, and that word we always use when the markets are looking at a situation. Because for the markets, the big economic challenge for the UK was Brexit. If we are in a position where neither of the parties have a solid majority and have to go through tough negotiations, are in weak positions, there could be another election. This could have a situation where a Scottish referendum could become back into play, depending on those negotiations. The markets look at that and would much prefer a 70 majority for Theresa May or a 70 majority for Jeremy Corbyn, whatever their policies may be, because at least then they can make a judgment on what the likelihood trajectory of those negotiations
So you're saying
are.
it's uncertainty, not thinking that there's going to be possibly a softer Brexit if Theresa May doesn't have the majority?
There is some argument, which I must admit I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for, which is the notion that there could be a softer Brexit if there is either a Jeremy Corbyn-led government or a hung parliament and Theresa May having to put together a coalition. And the reason I say that is because I think the uncertainty of would this government last for 5 years or 4 years? Would it last the whole of the Brexit process? Would the Brexit process be put back to Parliament in any substantive way? I think those concerns would outweigh any notion that there could be a slightly better deal with Europe, because I think those things are, the uncertainty is just going to loom much larger. And I think that's the reaction you are getting with the currencies. But of course, we've been here before. We've been here before. With Brexit, the currency plunged to 120. We're well above that. It has already, on that 2%, just slightly... We have to wait for those first marginals to really see...
And the currency traders are making a fortune.
Some will be on the right side of this bet, David.
Sitting there,
and some will be on the
making
wrong
a
side.
million here and a million there and a billion here and a billion there.
Some will be losing as well.
They're all gamblers, really, yes. All right.
No, it's more than that, David. They're making a judgment on the possible strength of the UK economy in the future.
OK. Well, like racehorses, they may be right, they may be wrong, but I call it gambling. But anyway, let's go to Scotland. Just a reminder of the figures in Scotland. The exit poll gave the SNP down 22 at 34, Emily, and I don't know which ones you've got up there. But let's see what the story is in Scotland.
We're going to need a new word for caveat soon. I feel like I'm in the front line, and we're talking about extreme caveat because the S&P is even harder than some of the other places to read. We know at the moment, according to the forecast, the S&P are on 34 seats, that is. That means that they would lose 12 if the poll is on target. And these are some of the ones that we are hearing there is a 90% chance of them losing. Let me go into the first one, which comes out on our forecast as a gain for the Conservatives. Aberdeenshire West and Kincardine, they call this Aberdeenshire Westlife because all the candidates there are under 30. You'll see there Stuart Donaldson, the current MP here, but the forecast is suggesting that even with that massive majority of 7,000 and the Conservatives needing a 6.4% swing, on the forecast, they would take it, OK? That's the first possible gain for the Conservatives, looking quite likely, according to the poll. Perth and North Perthshire. Now, this was the Conservative target 88, if you can get your head around that. It would seem as if the Conservative chances in Scotland may be much better than in England, but of course we haven't had a result in yet. This is what the forecast here is showing. It's what we call a Tory long shot. They'd need nearly 9% swing here, but that would put the Conservatives on 50% share of the vote if the poll is accurate. A couple of others that the SNP would lose, this time not to the Conservatives, but to the Lib Dems. This one much more tightly fought. John Nicholson, a former TV presenter, and under the forecast, the former TV presenter goes out, and in comes Jo Swinson, who you might remember from last time. She lost her seat, the Lib Dem business minister in 2015, and she would take it back on a pretty decent share of the vote, 43%, a big gap there, much bigger than the swing she would need if we're on track. And one more, Edinburgh West, which was number 9 on the Lib Dem targets. And you can see how the 2015 share has those two top parties, SNP in first place and Lib Dems in second. On the forecast then, and this is often a four-way contest, you could see the Lib Dems taking 40% share of the vote. Now, these are all tentative, but why I'm showing you those is they are the most likely ones to actually change colour tonight. There are a lot more in Scotland that we would call 50-50. They're on the cusp. We wouldn't go further than that at this stage, but that's why the exit poll is in such a sort of caveated mode at present.
And these parties that are eroding the SNP are all pro the union, don't want another referendum on the union.
Well, there you go. That might have something to do with it, certainly, if we're seeing that step backwards from the SNP. But what's interesting is, for example, in Aberdeenshire West, I was looking at the Leave vote as well.
Yeah.
Aberdeenshire West, you can see 39%, which looks like quite a low Leave vote, although, to put it in context, it's quite a high Leave vote for Scotland. Maybe that has given the Conservatives a bit of a chance here. Some of them in Scotland, we know, are in the sort of 70-30 model.
Thanks very much, Emily. Well, let's go up to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and join Sarah Smith, the Scotland editor. What do you make of this poll? And, of course, you'll be entering the same caveats everybody else has, but if it's true...
Absolutely, and the SNP themselves look a little anxious about this, but I wouldn't say that they think they're on target to lose that many seats. They were braced for some losses, because remember, they had such an amazing result 2 years ago where they won 56 out of the 59 seats that are in Scotland. It seemed inevitable that they were going to lose some of them. This would be really, really remarkable if the exit poll is in any way correct about that. And as you were alluding to with Emily there, the dynamic of this campaign in Scotland has been completely different. You have the SNP as the incumbents, essentially, because they had so many of the seats, and the Tories as the insurgents, the ones who thought that they could take a few seats off the SNP. They were optimistic about something between 6 and 10, maybe even a dozen seats. They would be very happy with that in Scotland. And the campaign narrative here has been different because it's been all about independence, because it was just 3 months ago that Nicola Sturgeon said she wanted another referendum on Scottish independence. And the Tories have cast themselves as the one party who say they can stop another independence referendum, the most staunch defenders of the United Kingdom, although, of course, Labour and the Lib Dems also say they don't want another Scottish referendum. But the Tories have really taken on that mantle of the Union, and that's what they hope could propel them to take a good few seats off the SNP tonight.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Cardiff and join Sian Lloyd. The Plaid Cymru figure was that it remains at 3. What other things have been on in Wales? We expect any other changes?
Well, I'm in Cardiff, where 3 of the 4 Cardiff constituencies are counting. We're not expecting any results from here for quite some time. Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales, has just been alongside me here on the balcony. He's just arrived at this count and was just trying to get a sense of his reaction to this exit poll, because earlier polls were saying that perhaps the Conservatives could gain 9 seats here in Wales. Of course, Wales has traditionally been a Labour stronghold for the past 100 years. It was only back in 1983 that the Conservatives had their high watermark here when they gained 14 seats at the height of Margaret Thatcher's popularity. But Theresa May was hoping to make inroads here. She came to Wales 3 times during this campaign to 4 different constituencies. She went to Clwyd South, to Wrexham. She was hoping, Wales had voted to leave, that in some of these Welsh marginal constituencies that had voted to leave, that she would be gaining support here, and she was really targeting them. Of course, we've got to see what the results are now. Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales, really led Labour's campaign here in Wales. Jeremy Corbyn did visit, but he wasn't particularly visible here, and Labour were campaigning under the brand of Welsh Labour, which they say has been successful for them in the past. What he's just been saying now is that he doesn't want to comment on it too much on this exit poll. Of course, it's very early days, but he did make the point that he didn't feel that Theresa May had engaged with people when she had come on these visits, and he made the point that she hadn't entered into the debates. Plaid Cymru, as you said, expected to remain on 3. They have been working very hard on Ynys Môn. That was a target seat for them, and their former leader, Carwyn Jones, coming out of retirement to stand as an MP there. So they're going to be looking very closely at that. And also the Rhondda, where they've been working very hard. It's their leader, Leanne Wood's backyard, and they've been campaigning very hard there on the streets. And it's where Leanne Wood chose to launch the Plaid Cymru manifesto.
Sian Lloyd there down in Cardiff. Clive Murray is in South London, Tooting. He's in Tooting, covering Battersea and Putney as well. What's the story there tonight? I should just say, Clive, before you start, we're keeping an eye, obviously, on our first result from Sunderland or wherever. Over to you, anyway.
Yes, could be very interesting here in the Wandsworth area. 3 constituencies, as you say, David. Putney, Justin Greening, Conservative Cabinet Minister, big figure in the party. Pretty unassailable, it seems, according to the polls. 10,000 majority, so highly likely to retain that seat for the Conservatives. It's the Tooting and Battersea seats that could be very interesting indeed. Tooting, of course, Sadiq Khan's old seat, now the Mayor of London. In the by-election, once he stood down in 2016, it was held by the Labour Party, Rosina Alin Khan, but her majority was just over 6,000, and the Conservatives have coveted Tooting for the last 2 election cycles at least. They've poured money in here, they've poured campaigners in here, and they really felt, certainly up until the last 4 or 5 days of the campaign, that they were making inroads. But I've talked to some of the Labour activists here. They're pretty confident that they will hang on to Tooting. They've been putting out mail shots to all their activists in the area to come to Tooting to campaign, and their feeling is that they've done pretty well on the doorstep. The final seat here, Battersea, held by the Conservatives, Jane Ellison, a majority of 8,000, but that tonight is being described as on a knife edge. And if the overall exit poll that you've been talking about throughout the evening is anything to go by, then it could well be that the Labour Party have taken that seat. So very interesting times here at the Wandsworth count.
We're waiting for Houghton and Sunderland South. Before we get it, and there they are counting, Emily, tell us what we should look out for in terms of verifying the exit poll, if you can do that.
This is the first real test of the exit poll and whether it's on target. This is the 2015 share of the vote. It's solid Labour. We don't expect that to change. Labour then on 55% share of the vote at the moment. UKIP in second place on 22, and the Conservatives in third place on 18. Now, if our forecast is on track, then Labour share of the vote will go up to 68%. Keep that figure in your mind, and when the real result comes in, If it's on or around there, we know that the exit poll is correct in this seat, in this part of the world at least. This is what our forecast is suggesting. There could be a big drop for UKIP there, down 15%. Some gains, even for the Conservatives here, and large gains of 13% for Labour. So those are the sorts of figures that we'll be putting side by side the exit poll to see if it all makes sense.
John Curtis was our man in charge of the exit poll, which was done by these 3 broadcasting companies. John, what would you like to say about it? Are you surprised by it? The politicians seem very surprised.
I think we should always start with exit polls by suggesting what we can rule out. It seems to me that unless the exit poll is incredibly wrong, that the Prime Minister has failed to achieve her principal objective, which was that she was going to achieve a landslide or at least a very big majority for her party in the next House of Commons and thereby provide her with potentially rather more wiggle room over Brexit. I think the second thing that we can probably rule out is that the Labour Party is going to end up with more seats for the Conservatives and that indeed we are still probably talking about Theresa May or at least somebody from the Conservative Party heading the next administration. So those are, I think, probably 2 things we can rule out. Thereafter, while our exit poll at the moment is saying that its central forecast is 314 Conservative seats, which is short of an overall majority, I will remind you that 2 years ago we said it was going to be 316 Conservative seats. In the end, it ended up being 331. So we certainly cannot rule out the possibility that the Conservatives will still have an overall majority, but maybe one that isn't much bigger than the one that they had before the election was called.
John, thanks very much. A reminder of how it would look in the House of Commons. Jeremy, are you ready? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
OK. Let's just take a look at the House of Commons. We've got a device here, David, which we were just looking at, our coalition builder. So when the election campaign began, we thought, well, this is not going to be, surely how it's ending up. But we are looking now at who and how you put together the 326 MPs you need for an overall majority in the House of Commons. So what we have here are the numbers. We have the Conservatives 314, Labour 266 from the exit poll. We keep having to say without having a result yet. And what we're going to do is pull them out one at a time. So let's bring the Conservatives first, 314. And we can, as you see here, we have the 326 line just here. Can they find some alliances that will give them a majority in the House of Commons to maybe not a coalition, maybe just a working arrangement, something at least to get the Queen's speech through to start off with. So 314 for the Conservatives, if that is the result, leaves them as they were in 2010 looking for friends. In 2010, they went to the Liberal Democrats. This time, it's not going to work. The Lib Dems seem to have been burned by that, so they are not playing ball with the Conservatives. So we will put in, shall we, let's see, we'll put in the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland, who've been happy in the past to cooperate with the Conservatives, maybe not as an official coalition, but at least to work with them vote by vote. The trouble here is they need 326. Under the exit poll, they're so far short of that they can only make 322 with the DUP. And then you're left, there's no UKIP MP under the exit poll to bring in. You're left with a situation where they've fallen short. So for the Conservatives, this really is very awkward. I'll put it into the House of Commons and I'll just show you. Worth saying, again, that, of course, the exit poll wouldn't need to be, it's gone on the other side. Well, there we are. It's, they've actually put all the parties into the other side of the House of Commons. Worth saying, though, the exit poll could be only slightly wrong, and it could change those figures drastically, so the Conservatives then don't need very many alliances to get their 326 in the House of Commons. Shall we just try this quickly with Labour? Let's just see what the numbers can do for Labour. Now, again, it's tricky because the Lib Dems have said similar things about Labour that they've said about the Conservatives. But let's just try this, just so we could visualise it. 266 Labour seats. Now we say, OK, maybe there's some way of getting the SNP to work with Labour. Maybe the two of them could agree vote by vote, bill by bill, maybe just to agree a Queen's speech. Maybe at this point, if the Conservatives haven't got any means of getting a Queen's speech through, they're off the pitch. So it's Labour and the SNP, and that makes 300. They're still a way short. I won't put in the let's put in the Lib Dems just for the sake of it. But even then, you're still nowhere near 326. So it looks you'd put in Plaid Cymru probably, the SDLP in Northern Ireland, the one Green MP under the exit poll. It's all very theoretical because we're dealing with numbers which we haven't had confirmed at all yet. But it's no easier for Labour to put a team together to get to 326 under these numbers. I mean, this exit poll is so extraordinary, David, because it leaves all the parties a bit stuck. It really does leave the Conservatives in difficulty getting to 326.
Let's just look at one of the building blocks of that, Jeremy. Geoffrey Donaldson of the DUP, Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. Last time round, Mr Donaldson, you had 8 MPs. If that happened again, what's your view of what you do, and what do you make of this election that was called to give the Prime Minister an overall sweeping grand majority?
Well, David, good evening from Lisburn in Northern Ireland. This is perfect territory for the DUP, obviously, because if the Conservatives are just short of an overall majority, it puts us in a very, very strong negotiating position. And certainly that is one that we will take up with relish.
And what would your negotiating position be, just for viewers who don't know what it is?
Well, I'm not going to spell that out in detail at this stage. Obviously, as in 2015, we had a lot of speculation. At the early stages of the evening, the Conservatives in the end managed an overall majority at that stage. So I'm not going to preempt the outcome. But what I will say is that we will be serious players. If there is a hung parliament, we will go in and we will talk to whoever it is. It looks like the Conservative Party will be the largest party. We will talk to them. We have a lot in common. We want to see Brexit work for the United Kingdom and, of course, for Northern Ireland. We want to see the Union strengthened, and the Conservatives are committed to that. So I think there is a lot of common ground on which we can work. And obviously, we will want to get the best deal for Northern Ireland itself.
So you're keeping something up your sleeve from our viewers tonight, Mr Donaldson, because we know you were in favour of Brexit, and presumably you'll put your, change the analogy, shoulder to the wheel on that. But what else is it you're thinking of? Just give us a clue.
Well, David, I've been a negotiator in Northern Ireland now for quite a number of years, and I know that any serious negotiator doesn't reveal their hand in advance, and we're not going to do that. In the past, and I can give you some clues, in the past what we have done is operate on a vote-by-vote basis with whoever is the government and looked at issues as they arose in the House of Commons.
Thank you very much.
We may be into a different scenario this time.
Well, when we're into it, maybe we could talk again. Thank you very much. Laura, you had a point.
Saying, in this previous parliament, where the Tories have already been dealing with a small majority, working majority of 17, they've already, on some issues, been very dependent on the DUP. They are well used to dealing with them behind the scenes. And I have to say, the DUP, who tend to take a stronger line on Brexit than the Tory party, are very used to pressing the levers to get things they want out of the Conservatives. Also worth saying, just to remember, in terms of that number of 326, of course, Sinn Féin MPs don't tend to take their seats. So when we're thinking about if these numbers are right, the Tories trying to build some kind of deal, maybe with the DUP, the actual number that they're looking at is 323. If it's going to be so finely balanced,
they never have taken those seats, have
well,
they, Sinn Féin?
No.
We think we've got about 2 minutes. Michelle, let's just go over to you for a moment. We'll keep an eye on Sunderland in case it comes through, or Newcastle.
David, with me is John Landsman, the chair of Momentum, the organisation that was set up to support the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. John Landsman, what would a result in line with this exit poll mean for Mr Corbyn personally?
Well, it would put him in a clear position of having fought a very successful campaign, which has resulted in Theresa May failing to get the overwhelming majority that she was seeking. She sought to an election that she had several times said she wasn't going to call in order to get that overwhelming majority, and she's utterly failed. Jeremy's fought a fantastic campaign.
Nevertheless, it looks, according to this, as if the Conservatives will be the largest party. And knowing Mr Corbyn as you do, will he be trying to have those conversations, difficult as they are for all the reasons that Jeremy just outlined, with the SNP, with the Liberal Democrats, with others, to try and find a route to number 10?
I really think it's much too early to start talking about those things. This is just an exit poll. As it was said, very small changes in these results could completely change the arithmetic of that kind of thing if that's where we are. And I'm not, it's not clear that that's where we are. I think that really is premature.
John Landsman, thank you.
One of the reasons that it's taking a bit longer to count tonight is that the turnout in Sunderland is up by about 5 percentage points, up to about 61%. Still quite a low turnout, actually. The average was in the mid-60s last time round, but that's one of the reasons. But just remember, when we do come to it, we mark the card. Peter Kellner, our election analyst, is here. You've got the raw figures, what you think Sunderland would deliver.
On those turnout figures, if our exit poll is right, then Jill Phillipson, the Labour candidate, who got 21,000 votes last time, will get 27 to 28,000
Newcastle has won, and we'll go there, and I'll come back to you in a moment. Let's have the Newcastle result. They're the winners.
Hang on. Can you ring the news desk or the...
Well, they have to read it out fast.
Can I...
Sian Wara is the
please?
Labour MP.
I'm ready to declare the result
had a majority
for Newcastle upon
last time
Tyne
of 12,500, over 12,500.
I, Pat Ritchie, returning officer, hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for Newcastle upon Tyne Central constituency is as follows. Nick Cott, Liberal Democrats, 1,812. Steve Kite, Conservative Party candidate, 9,134. David Mewat, UK Independence Party, UKIP, 1,482. Chi Onwurah, Labour Party, 24,071. Peter John Stewart Thompson, Green Party candidate, 595. And that Chi Onwurah has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
So here for the first time is the way we'll be showing the results tonight. Newcastle, no surprise that Chi Onwurah has held the seat. Majority of 14,900 and so, up 2,200 from last time. The first victor of the night, let's just hear a word from her.
The terrible murder of Joe Cox just a year ago and following the atrocious attacks in Manchester and London. It is thanks to our police and our emergency services that the democratic process can come to such a successful conclusion. And I'd also like to thank the returning officer and all the staff here. It is for an efficient and extremely quick count. And I'm also really glad to see that the National Youth Council...
So the counters in Sunderland looking very pleased with themselves, at Newcastle rather, having beaten Sunderland, pipped them to the post. Now, the interesting thing about this is let's just see the share, and this tells you the story. Labour on 65%, the Conservatives on 25%, Liberal Democrats on 5%, UKIP on 4%. The change since last time, Labour up 10 and the Conservatives up 10 percentage points, UKIP down 11. And the swing from Conservative to Labour, 2%. Now, Peter Kellner, in your view, that is better for the Conservatives and worse for Labour
substantially
than the exit poll was suggesting.
The projection from the exit poll to this seat was suggesting a split Labour Conservatives 74% 14. We've got 65-25. So the exit poll was projecting a 7% swing to Labour. We've got a 2% swing to Labour. Now, you know, this is a safe seat. It's not a battleground seat. The exit polls are not going to be that reliable in these kinds of seats.
Well, OK,
but
let me
this
ask...
first straw, it's better for the Tories.
Let me ask John Curtis that. Peter Kellner says it's not as accurate in this seat. Is that right? Or do you accept the analysis?
Absolutely right. And I can explain why we were forecasting a big swing to Labour in this seat. One of the things that the exit poll looks as though it found is that Labour would do better in the seats that it was defending where there was a substantial Remain vote in 2016 as opposed to those places where there's a substantial Leave vote. So, for example, we don't expect Labour to do as well in Sunderland as we thought they would do in Newcastle. But I think what we should note at this point is simply the direction of travel. It is a 2% swing to Labour. Yep, it is a safe seat, but it is the first sign of the night that maybe the country is going to drift from the Conservatives to the Labour Party.
Drift from the Conservatives to Labour?
Yes, we've got a 2% swing to Labour in this poll. In the seat.
Drift, but not for Labour to overtake the Conservatives. Just saying.
No, absolutely. I mean, if we were to...
And Newcastle, of course, was 50-50 on Brexit pretty well, wasn't
Sure,
it?
yeah, but it's a much more pro-Remain Labour seat than...
Yes, I take that.
Is the Sunderland
I don't know what's happened to Sunderland, John. They were beavering away, but nothing seems to have happened. All those white gloves and that running around.
But one of the things to say, David, that increase in the turnout in Newcastle is something that it is thought has occurred fairly broadly across the country. And given that one of the question marks about this election was, would people turn out? Would young people in particular turn out? I would guess that the Labour Party would regard the evidence that turnout is up as relatively encouraging from their point of view.
And do you have any evidence about young people? Because we know that...
No. We don't. All I can tell... Well, yes and no. What I can tell you is that in general, we are finding that in constituencies where there are a large number of graduates, who are, of course, disproportionately younger, we expect Labour to do better than in places where there are fewer graduates. Indeed, in general, it looks as though from the exit poll that part of Britain which was predominantly Remain is going to be relatively good territory for Labour, and that part of Britain that was predominantly Leave is going to be relatively good territory for the Conservatives, and that therefore this may indeed end up of having been a Brexit election, even though the issue of Brexit disappeared off the campaign agenda.
Thanks, John. I think we have the Sunderland result.
Houghton and Sunderland South. I, Irene Lucas, Acting Returning Officer, hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for the Houghton and Sunderland South constituency is as follows.
I hope you can hear this.
Richard Peter Bradley, Green Party,
a bit difficult.
725. Paul John Edgeworth, Liberal Democrat, 908. Paul Howell, Conservative Party, 12,324. Michael Anthony Joyce, UK Independence Party, 2,379. Bridget Lave Phillipson, Labour Party, 24,000. And Nick Watson, Independent, 479.
Well, they may...
that Bridget Lave Phillipson has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
They may be able to count in a hurry. They certainly need to take control of their sound system. Labour won. It was a safe Labour seat, but the Conservatives are up more than Labour in that seat. UKIP went down to 2,300 from 8,000 last time round. And if I heard it right, the Conservatives are on 12,300, up from 7,000. We don't seem to have all the figures in, because I think we may have missed the Labour figure. We're trying to find it out. And when we do, we'll be able to explain what's happened. But again, it's another seat where it looks as though... Would you
like
say
Newcastle,
that, yes,
in Sunderland, the Conservatives have done substantially better than the exit poll projection. Labour has done substantially worse. Now, these are two constituencies, 20 miles apart. So there may be something going on in safe Labour seats in that region that the exit poll hasn't quite picked up. Or it might be that the exit poll is wrong. We'll have to wait 2 or 3 hours to find out, David.
Nora.
Interesting, though, in both of those seats, we've seen a significant fall away in the UKIP vote. Now, for the Conservatives, from the start of this election, the central part of their strategy was UKIP voters who might have been previously Labour voters in this election, they hope would go straight across to the Conservatives. And there are 71 seats across the country where the Labour majority was smaller than the UKIP vote in 2015. Now, early days, but a pattern, even in these safe Labour seats, that the UKIP vote is crashing, and the Conservatives need that to happen right across the country if they're to end up in any kind of position to form a decent majority.
And it looks as if the UKIP vote is not crashing as completely to the Conservatives as some of the projections in advance suggested. And that may be one of the reasons why Labour is doing a bit better than the pre-election polls.
Indeed. I'm still trying to discover what happened in Houghton and Sunderland South, because we haven't been able to produce the figures or the share or the change. because of apparently a microphone failure at the count, which seems rather weird. Is it not? Have anyone got it on Twitter? Have you got it on? No, you haven't got it on Twitter. Have you got it?
Let me try and
No?
find it.
Nobody's got it. Well, we'll try and get it in due course. Let's, in the meantime, go to Tim Farron's seat, or what was his seat, in Westmoreland and Lonsdale. Join Lucy Manning. Lucy, good evening.
Good evening. We're outside Tim Farron's house. We're expecting him back here fairly soon. If the exit poll is right, and that, of course, is a big if, this will be seen as a pretty good night for the Liberal Democrats. Even if they only gain a handful of seats, the expectations, I think, were so low because there was such criticism of the campaign, the Liberal Democrats offering this second vote on a Brexit deal that the voters didn't really seem to want, and questions about Tim Farron's leadership. But now, with this exit poll suggesting they could get 14 seats, it leaves him potentially in the position of a kingmaker. And yesterday, when I spent some time with him on the bus, I talked over the idea if there was going to be a hung parliament, what the Liberal Democrats would do. He was absolutely clear that there would be no deals, no pact, no coalition, no confidence supply where they voted for the budget. Of course, you remember, everyone remembers the Liberal Democrats got burnt when they went into coalition. They lost all those seats at the last election, and he is mindful of that and doesn't want to repeat that. And Lib Dem sources tonight being very clear that that position stays the same. No deals, no coalitions, no pacts. So if there is a hung parliament situation, I think the Liberal Democrats will be in a situation where both sides might want them, but they will only offer support on a vote-by-vote basis. I should add that they are not sure this exit poll is right. They are being cautious. In previous years, the exit polls had them on more seats than they ended up getting. They say that some of their key battles are too close to call. They're seeing a hardening up of the vote for Labour in some of the university seats that they hope to get. But I think at the moment they are more optimistic than I think they thought they would be at this stage.
Well, whether they have that traction, we'll discover as we get a few more results in. We now do have the Houghton and Sunderland South result, a safe Labour seat. There is the raw figures, 24,665 for Labour. UKIP in third place, Conservatives going up into second place. And the change since last time, let's just see that, or rather, yes, there's the change. Conservatives up 11 percentage points, UKIP down 16 percentage points. The swing here from Labour to Conservatives of 3.5%. So, Peter Kellner, what do you make of that one?
Well, the exit poll expectation was almost the exact swing in the opposite direction, around a 3% swing to Labour. So these first two results unquestionably will be chewing the Conservatives up after a pretty grim hour following the exit poll. But whether that chew will carry on through the seats that really matter, the battleground seats where the majorities last time were very much narrower, that we'll have to wait and see.
What would you be looking for next as a test? Because these are both seats in the northeast, and where would you want to get your spread if you wanted to make it clearer?
It may be an hour or two before we get, because these seats rush to declare, and there may not be many in the really interesting places.
Slough, we were told Slough was going to be very quick. I don't know whether they are.
Well, Slough would be interesting. Swindon North would be interesting. Battersea and Putney, two of the relatively early London declarations where the Conservatives might be vulnerable if Labour doing really well in London. Putney, of course, Justine Greening, the Education Secretary. Tooting, a Labour seat, Sadiq Khan won 2 years ago. These are the kind of seats, but I think a lot of these will be waiting until 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning to get. These very, very early declarations where they rush with all those kids to get the counts done within an hour, that's the exception.
Right.
More or less everywhere else, it'll take a lot longer.
We're joined by a familiar figure from politics, one party or another, Neil Hamilton, who's now the leader of UKIP in the Welsh Assembly. Mr. Hamilton, good evening.
Good evening.
It does look like a bit of a wipeout for UKIP then. You've done your job, you've got your Brexit, and that's it. Game's up.
Well, we've been squeezed. I mean, Theresa May intended this to be a sort of binary competition between Labour and the Tories, although it hasn't quite worked out as she expected after her disastrous campaign. But, UKIP has an endearing place in Welsh politics, certainly. We have our members in the Welsh Assembly for the next 4 years. And I believe that after this disastrous election for the Conservatives, we'll be able to carve out a permanent niche for ourselves in UK politics as well, because we put forward a lot of policies in this election campaign campaign, which none of the other parties can copy us on, like slashing the non-humanitarian aid budget significantly to put money into the health service, scrapping green taxes to cut people's electricity bills. None of that really came out in this campaign, which was focused, I think, for UKIP supporters purely on the Brexit issue, and a lot of them have clearly gone to the Tories, without which Theresa May's position would have been very, very bleak indeed.
UKIP, it looks as though UKIP won't have any seats in Westminster. You presumably would go along with that. You don't expect to gain a seat. Yeah.
No.
So your strength will be in Wales, really, you mean?
Well, it is, as a matter of fact.
No, that
yes.
was meant to be a tease. I wasn't actually saying that you could rebound from Wales.
Well, in Wales, of course, we have a proportional representation system, which means that we get fair representation, unlike in the first-past-the-post system at Westminster.
Neil Hamilton, thank you very much. Let's just hear what reaction has been for these two results, if you've got any, that we've had in.
Well, there's the initial shock, I think, David, in Conservative circles has subsided to some thoughts about the longer-term implications. Tim Montgomery, who's a very influential Conservative writer, just tweeted, Theresa May has been most disastrous Tory leader since, Anthony Eden. So there's some talk about how long she will last as Prime Minister. Tom Newton-Dunn, who's the political editor of The Sun, again, another paper that was very supportive of Theresa May, has been in touch with senior Tories who said that they've now crunched their own numbers, and this supports what Peter Kellner's been saying. Are convinced the exit poll is wrong. The quote he's got off the record there is, it simply just doesn't add up. More broadly, there's obviously a lot of talk about what this means for Brexit. And Alistair Campbell, who's been one of the most vigorous opponents of Theresa May and the Conservatives' plans for what he describes as a hard Brexit, says, this election is a rejection of May and hard Brexit, a vote for one to go and the other to be revisited. That's obviously going to be a big part of the post-election discussion. And we've got some of the initial foreign reaction, because Carl Bildt, the former Swedish Prime Minister, has also put up a message saying this could be messy. This could be messy for the United Kingdom in the years ahead. One mess risks following another, price to be paid for the lack of true leadership. So there's obviously huge international implications, and opponents of Theresa May in Europe are looking at this with some glee, I think.
Laura, let's just go back for a moment to this exit poll. What would Theresa May need to get to quell anxiety, fury, plotting against her in the Conservative Party? What do you think she's obviously heard the exit poll. What would she be thinking to herself? How much do I need to remain Prime Minister?
If the exit poll turns to be anything like right, then it is very, very dicey for her indeed. Why do I say that?
Don't worry.
Because even after the campaign, one senior Conservative said to me today, after the mistakes that she's made in the campaign, she will not be allowed to fight the next general election campaign. Now, that was one view, but from a senior member of the party that said even the experience of seeing her exposed in some ways on the campaign trail, not seeming politically nimble, not seeming able to run a resounding campaign, that her time was limited in terms of staying on fully till the next general election. Now, of course, this could be wrong. A significant majority, a safe majority, could blow her out of the water. But I think for people in the last couple of weeks have been saying if it is sort of 30 or below, then she's very damaged by that. I think most Tories would have been happy with a majority of 50 or 60, but if the poll's anything like right, she's miles away from that. So if she ends up with no overall majority, she's very, very damaged. But I think if the result, even if she climbs up to a majority of sort of 15, 20, 25, 30, she's still very, very tarnished by this whole experience.
Of course, she had a working majority of 17
Indeed,
at
she
dissolution.
did, which was uncomfortable. It was difficult.
Yeah.
She had to give up on some things. She had to change her mind. She had to drop policies that she was not going to be able to get through. She made her Chancellor ditch the central part of his budget because the party wouldn't wear it. But she did have a majority. She was actually still able to get things done. She didn't have to call this election.
Do you think she'd be able to change her Chancellor, which everybody said before this election, Hammond was on the way out?
It was widely expected that if she ended up with a majority, she was going to sack Philip Hammond. Now, you never know until the reshuffle actually comes, but that was a very wide expectation.
But I mean, she won't be in a very strong position to do things that offend other parts of the party.
Indeed
she's
not.
Close.
But in terms of the current balance of the Conservative Party, I think cheerleaders for Mr Hammond would not necessarily be in great enough numbers to be able to force her to keep him. That said, if the political situation seems extremely rocky, extremely uncertain, certainly in terms of the economic reaction, changing a chancellor who's respected by the city is not something that would be seen as a wise move.
Don't think that it's just us sitting here in the studio talking. All over the country, 650 places. Well, actually, since we've had 648 places. Are busy counting. Let's just see where they are. Islington, for instance, at the moment, where Jeremy Corbyn's seat is counted and Emily Thornberry's old seat is counted. Huddersfield, where there are a whole clutch of marginal constituencies in West Yorkshire, which the Conservatives were hoping to make grounds in. 2 seats in Derby, 1 Conservative seat and Labour's Margaret Beckett. And then Westmoreland and Lonsdale, where we were a moment ago, where Tim Farron's constituency. All these people either brought in as volunteers, paid, sometimes bank clerks paid overtime to do this work. And you see, it's responsible work and tiring. You've got to open each one, verify it, make sure you've made no mistake. Not electronic at all done by hand in the old-fashioned way. That's why it's taking a bit of time. And if it's true that the turnout everywhere is up, then the slower pace of results is what we can expect. Michelle.
David, with me is the former Labour Home Secretary and former Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw. Welcome. When Jeremy Corbyn was first elected, you said he would lead Labour into political oblivion. This is a night where the exit poll, at least, suggests that Labour has made gains under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership.
Yes, and if that's the case, I'm delighted, because I've been in the Labour Party actually slightly longer than Jeremy Corbyn. And I've been working in this election, as everybody has, for a Labour victory. One of the really interesting things about this election is notwithstanding, though it's perfectly public, that quite a lot of people, particularly in the parliamentary party or just left, had reservations about Jeremy. But one of the really interesting things about the election is that the Labour Party as a whole has been very disciplined in this election. It's got behind Jeremy Corbyn, it's got behind the manifesto, and if this exit poll is anything to go by, it suggests we've done better than most people thought.
You seem to be suggesting that it's more about the party and the party machine than a personal vindication.
No, I mean, listen, it's also a great personal credit to Jeremy Corbyn if this is correct, and to John McDonnell, and no one can take it away from them, because what you've seen in the election, I didn't expect it, I'll be perfectly honest, is great vigour and consistency by the Labour Party, including on the ground by Labour candidates. And again, the thing I didn't expect was that in place of a strong and stable leader, to coin a phrase, you've had a weak and wobbly leader. And this is a sort of disaster for both the Conservative Party and for Theresa May. The only perhaps silver lining out of it, from their point of view, from the country's point of view, if it ends up with a hung parliament with the Conservatives being the largest party, we may get a more sensible set of negotiations for Brexit than would otherwise be the case.
Well, not necessarily, though. I mean, it depends where she looks for support. If it's the DUP, for example, with the obvious people that she'll turn to in the first instance.
But if you're in I worked in a minority government. I worked in the 1974 to 79 Labour government. And if you're in that situation, then you have to compromise not only with your own side, but also with the other side as well. It's just the way the alchemy and the chemistry of Parliament works.
Jack Straw, thank you very much. David.
Thanks. John, we just had a query, it's coming through on Twitter, about the exit poll. People saying that 20, maybe 25% of people have cast postal ballots.
Yep.
You stand your people at secret, I know, because you won't, I've asked you to tell me where they are, you won't tell me, secret polling stations around the country, 144 of them. What happens about the postal ballots, a quarter of the votes?
Well, basically what we're doing with the exit poll is comparing how people who went to the polling station voted this time with how those people who went to the same polling station 2 years ago voted. So the assumption we are essentially making is not necessarily that postal voters will vote the same way as those who went to the polling station, but that the movement in whatever direction will be roughly similar amongst those who voted by post and those who voted direct.
That
now,
makes it clear. So
obviously-
it's a sample, really. That's it.
Obviously, it may be true they behave differently. The one thing I can tell you is that one of the things we looked at our data was our polling stations vary in the proportion of people who are registered to vote by post. But there isn't any relationship between the swing to the Conservatives or Labour or whatever and the proportion of people in a polling station that were registered to vote by post.
And one other thing, is it possible under your exit poll that there could nevertheless, at the end of the night, be a substantial Conservative majority?
Well, it depends on how you define substantial or big. But
It was
I mean,
Peter Kellner's point. How would you define it, Peter?
I would have said a majority.
He's on toast now.
Right. What I'm saying is if the exit poll is as wrong everywhere else as has been in these first two results, then you could have a 80, 100 Conservative majority.
OK, 80 or 100,
but even if you dial that down, you could still have a majority of 30 or 40.
OK. John?
Oh, a majority of 30 or 40, I think we still have to regard as potentially possible.
No, he said 80 or 100.
Well, 80 or 100, shall we say, then I think, we clearly will be seriously astray. I mean, I won't want to bore you, but one of the things that often happens...
You never, ever bore us.
One of the things that often happens with exit polls is that they exaggerate the forecast in terms of the differences between constituencies, OK? So because we are looking at two Labour constituencies, in both of which we're expecting quite a substantial swing to Labour, actually a bigger swing to Labour than across the country as a whole, it may be that we've simply exaggerated the extent to which that's going on.
All right, David. OK, and we're going to join... I'll come back to you all in a moment, but Katya Adler is standing by in Brussels, Europe editor, and let's just join her. Katya, have you had a reaction to the surprising exit poll, let me put it no stronger than that, that we've had this evening?
I mean, no official reaction so far because, of course, we are talking about exit polls, but I would love to see the thought bubbles here in Brussels in political and EU circles in Berlin and in Paris tonight, because it's in all of these places across Europe that people, politicians, leaders are glued to their television and radio sets tonight. It's not just in the United Kingdom, because, of course, this will have a huge impact on Brexit. Now, the EU didn't really care how these elections turned out, what flavour of government would come out of this in the UK. But nearly a year on after the EU referendum, they really want to get down to business. They were hoping to start those face-to-face negotiations with the UK for the first time in about 10 days' time. And now all of this, there's a big question mark hanging over it. They wanted, what they said was a strong prime minister, a secure prime minister, somebody who would be in place for the duration of the negotiations, somebody who knew their mind and were confident in it and wouldn't be beholden to smaller groups, whether within their party or outside their party, because what the EU doesn't want once negotiations start is someone who wavers and U-turns and doesn't really know their mind. And of course, this is most important of all for the UK, because that clock is ticking. Article 50 was triggered. The formal countdown to Brexit has started under EU rules. The UK only has until March 2019 to get that divorce deal signed, sealed and delivered by the EU, never mind a future trade deal. So any hesitation, that is costly for the UK.
So in other words, they did want Theresa May to get a hefty majority, because you said at the beginning they didn't care, but from what you're saying subsequently, if they want clarity, if they want a leader who knows exactly what she's doing and doesn't have to look over her shoulder all the time, a big majority for Theresa May would have helped them.
They didn't want Theresa May more than Jeremy Corbyn or anybody else. They said that they just wanted to have a prime minister who would be secure enough in their position to be able to know their mind and push it forward in the negotiations, to appoint a chief Brexit negotiator for the EU. That's the most important figure. That's the person who'll be sitting opposite them at the table with the chief EU negotiator who comes from the European Commission, and they will be discussing or battling it out week by week, month by month, right up until the last minute, probably, by all Brussels deals, in the past. So what they need is a government that is stable, but not particularly for EU taste, Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn or anybody else, but just somebody who will remain in that seat for the duration of the negotiations.
It's interesting, this, because, as you know, there was some criticism of the campaign. We had John McDonnell here, John McDonnell, a moment, complaining that Brexit never surfaced, and he never talked about Brexit and how it would be conducted. The Conservatives never really talked about it. Is there a feeling that in Brussels that they have ideas, they know the way they want Brexit to go, but the British government doesn't know the way it wants it to go?
That is so much the feeling here. I mean, from the Brussels perspective, or the EU perspective, if you like, the UK seemed to tear itself apart after the EU referendum with recriminations between Leavers and Remainers, and it then dived into preparations for a general election. And in the meantime, you know, almost 12 months have gone by, and during that time, the EU has been quietly getting its Brexit ducks in the row. It has its chief Brexit negotiator in place. He has his team in place, and they've been dotting the I's and crossing the T's. They have issued very, very detailed draft negotiating papers already on specific points, like the amount of money it wants the UK to pay before it leaves the EU, like EU citizens' rights, the rights of citizens who stay in the UK after Brexit, and the rights of UK citizens who stay in the rest of the EU. So this is very, very detailed. Now, Theresa May said that they also had a very clear Brexit plan, but they didn't want to divulge it. But as far as the public was concerned, there were a lot of platitudes that were spread around. Brexit means Brexit and so on, and no more details than that. And the EU is a big, big, big contrast. I mean, they can't keep anything a secret because there are so many players involved, 27 countries, plus the European Commission and the European Parliament. And so they are being transparent. They're publishing all of this, and there are a lot of details prepared already.
Thank you very much indeed. Cambridge. Let's go to Cambridge now. Cambridge